The Great Migration. Until 1910, about 90% of all African Americans lived in the South. Nearly 80% were engaged in agriculture. Sometime before 1910, through the 1960s, there was a great migration of African Americans from the rural South to the urban areas of the North and West. This mass migration of African Americans began after Reconstruction ended in 1877. Faced with Jim Crow laws and terrorist activities of such groups as the Ku Klux Klan, many African Americans pulled up stakes and left the Deep South. Many went west, where they took up farming on the Great Plains. Many others found work as cowboys. By far, the greatest number of African Americans migrated to the cities of the North. During World War I, or 1914 to 1918, these years, hundreds of thousands of blacks left the South seeking a better life. With thousands of white workers in the military and the number of immigrants from Europe and elsewhere having been restricted, many blacks found work in factories and defense plants. They also found less discrimination. While they still suffered from racial prejudice, they could at least vote and send their children to better schools. All of this was to change. However, as soon as the war in Europe ended and white veterans returned to claim their former jobs, everything ended. Because of the Great Migration, which totaled about 1 million African Americans by 1930, the black populations of many northern cities more than doubled after 1910. Chicago, for example, which had about 35,000 African American citizens in 1910, counted 90,000 a decade later. Detroit's number rose from 6,000 before World War I to a whopping 120,000 by the beginning of the Great Depression in 1929. New York's black population more than tripled during the same period, going from 100,000 to 330,000. Burgeoning black populations in urban areas coupled with the return of white veterans from First World War resulted in keen competition for jobs and housing. Black veterans returning from the war expected better treatment and more rights. The result was racial strife and violence. In 1919 alone, there were 83 lynchings and 25 major race riots. These riots occurred in both the North and the South, in such places as Washington, D.C., Chicago, Illinois, and Knoxville, Tennessee. In Omaha, Nebraska, one black person was shot more than 1,000 times and then hanged on the main street. Equally gruesome incidents took place in other cities. Prejudice and discriminatory housing practices forced many African Americans into the rundown sections of America's cities, giving rise to black ghettos. A ghetto is a section of a city where a racial minority is forced by circumstances to live. As more and more African Americans migrated to large cities and the Great Depression of 1929 set in, ghetto tenements became overcrowded. In Chicago, for example, some 375,000 blacks lived in an area built to house no more than 110,000. So many people being confined to such a small area created shocking social, economic, and moral problems. Disease, poverty, crime, hopelessness, and violence were rampant and remained largely unchecked. The Chicago riot of 1919, mentioned briefly above, stemmed in part from the racial tension spawned by that city's housing situation. Similar conditions existed in other large cities of the North. The Black Ghetto, a product of the Great Migration of the early 20th century, became a permanent part of the American landscape.